screencast for the biology curriculum, chapter 2, which again is in unit 1, which is all about evolution. This chapter is all about evolution with a primary focus on natural selection and also the evidence behind evolution. These are the current Massachusetts frameworks that are covered in this chapter. So here is the series of lessons that happen. The first one is called Lucy. It's just a reading in the book with some process and procedure questions and analysis questions. The important thing here is an emphasis on the vocabulary of evidence and inference and the difference between the two as well. The next activity is called Modeling the Earth's History. This one does involve quite a bit of preparation. You need to set up a rope or string. You'll need a large space if you can, like a hallway to do it, or if you can put it all the way around your classroom, that's another nice way to do it. What you'll need to prepare is you'll need to mark that rope. There's instructions in the teacher's guide but how to mark off billions of years as well as hundreds of millions of years. You also need to print out the cards, the geological and biological event cards. I strongly suggest color coding them 2 different colors so that when students are walking the timeline and looking for patterns, they're more obvious. The big challenge here is students' sense of scale and their math at converting numbers. If you look at the table that students get with the times, they're all based on millions of years ago, but some are less than a million years, like 0.005, and they might have trouble converting that. One thing that I strongly suggest is that on the cards themselves, you write the years, and then also how that would look written out in a number that students are more familiar with. You may also want to do that on this table, unless your real emphasis here or something you're working on at your school is to help students with that. Otherwise, it will just make this activity take a lot longer. So you need to think about what your focus is in the activity. So another thing that I do is I usually place a few sample cards at different times so students get a sense of whether they're in the right ballpark of where they're putting their cards. And that way, usually students only have to put up 1 or 2 cards themselves as opposed to 3 or 4. A lot of them go very close to current day, so it can get bunched up. And this activity does take some time. You also want to make sure students have a chance to walk the timeline from 4.6 billion years ago up to today, that they can make a small scaled one in their notebook and really look for those patterns to be able to think about them. So the next activity is evidence for change. This is another one that requires quite a bit of preparation and quite a bit of planning and thinking of how it will run on your part. Students take on the roles of 4 different scientists. The book sets it up to be a jigsaw where students work in groups as each scientist and then report back to a home team. This is difficult to manage because each specialist group will want your attention. They're following specific instructions. They need materials. They may struggle with the vocabulary depending on the level of your students. Additionally, when they go back to their home teams, you won't be able to watch every presentation, so you won't necessarily know what they're sharing out and how well they understood it. So 2 possibilities. One is each specialist group could actually present to the whole class instead of doing it as a jigsaw. The second is that you have actually the whole class be each scientist and go through each of those activities. There's pros and cons to both in terms of preparation. If you are doing it as the jigsaw or the presentations, you'll need to prepare fewer materials, but you'll have to prepare them all at once. If you're doing it as a whole class, you will need more materials. You'll have time to do it as the activities go on, though. And then there is a fossil find essay at the end of this where students read about some fossils that were found and try to apply what they've learned. You might do that. There's also a CWA that we have that pulled out of one of these lessons that you may choose to use along with that or in place of that. So here are some of the preparations, just so you're aware. A lot of it is copy masters and just organizing it, color coding things, making sure they go with the right place. But there are some other materials that I'll just highlight. For example, for the paleobiologist, you need strata models with 3 different levels. You can use dirt, sand, and rocks, whatever you can easily find or that's cheap at a store to buy to make the 3 levels. Make sure you use clay or different colored paper that's consistent across your models in the different layers to be the fossil markers, which you will then color code to the pictures of the fossils that they find. For the physical anthropologist, there is one set of skulls that the district has that you can try to borrow. Otherwise, you'll need to make sure that you either have a computer where they can watch the slideshow from the teacher resource CD or the video CD, or you can print out those pictures. For the evolutionary biologist, you will need chicken wings, steamed or boiled, not fully cooked, or the meat won't come off very easily, and copy masters again. For the evolutionary developmental biologist, it's all paper, copies of the embryo puzzle that are cut up, and then also copies of DNA segments. So you'll need to really carefully go through the instructions for each type of scientist and make sure you know what students are expected to do. I like to give students structured handout where they're taking notes so they're really clear on what they're supposed to be recording as they go through each type of scientist. And then at the end, I give them this summary table so it's really clear what vocabulary I expected them to get out of being each type of scientist, and then they're summarizing the evidence that they actually collected as well as what kinds of inferences they can make. The other thing I'll point out, there are readings that go along with at least 3 of the 4 types of scientists, so you'll need to have them take notes or give them graphic organizers for note-taking. There are some, for example, for the fossil readings and fossil dating, and you'll just need to space those out and make sure that you give them to students at the appropriate time when they're doing the activities. After this is, you'll find the CWA on the BPS Science Weebly, which is down here, the task, the rubric, and then some supporting materials I have found. And it's actually the second half of the physical anthropologist activity that I've pulled out and separated to focus on CERR. After that is when I do the Unit 1 close reading found in South Africa. Again, you can find the materials on the Weebly. This is the first sort of close reading with text-dependent questions, so I would strongly encourage you to check it out ahead of time. Make sure you really structure it for students. And again, many of our students who are ELLs or have IEPs may have fluency issues, so it's important to hear a fluent reader read each section before they read it themselves and try to answer the questions. The next activity is explaining evolution. This is where students are expected to just use 3 essays in the book to get Darwin and how natural selection works, as well as what it means for something to be a theory. They're supposed to write a newspaper article. You'll need to include some videos, some other information, and some practice along with that to make sure that students are really getting the concepts. And you'll need to highlight that a theory is not just a theory. In addition to the reading, here's a graphic organizer that I have students complete as they do that reading. Modeling natural selection, students get to play a game where they are predators and prey. The way the book sets it up, it has you cut out lots of these colored dots. We suggest you just use 4 different colored beans that are the same size. So students hunt for the beans. 3 people on each team are predators. 1 is the game warden who sort of mixes them up between each round and has them follow instructions. I want to just show you one thing about the copy master. It's pretty complicated. This is the one that's included with the text and has you use 6 different colors. We would suggest you just use 25 beans of 4 different colors, and that you use a simplified data table such as the one that I've shown on the right, rather than having a separate table for each hunt. After this activity, this is when students are expected to get natural selection, so just a tip to check in, give them more practice, make sure they're really able to write that. The next activity is a cold hard look at culture. It's much more about cultural evolution. They get artifacts and watch a video on the Iceman. You could really probably skip this or do it just in one day. And the last activity is evaluate evolution in action, where they're putting everything together. There is a graph that students will need support in interpreting what the graph means. If you're going to have them write the essay that it has in the analysis, then take a look at the rubric. You may want to adapt it and change a little bit so it's your own. But they have 3 scenarios. They're learning about antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. If you do have the materials to do a wet lab that goes along with it, you can. Just the important thing is thinking about how you're going to scaffold the essay, and that at this point students should be able to use vocabulary to write about natural selection. And that is chapter 2.